Hello and welcome to Noble Mind.
Noble Mind is a podcast exploring mindfulness, meditation, and psychology.
Before we get started, I want to invite you to come to Unwind, a free drop-in practice session that I'm leading each week on Zoom. It lasts about 30 minutes and just long enough, hopefully, to fit between all your other tasks and to-dos. Each week, I give a brief science-backed tip to help with stress management or well-being enhancement. Then we spend about 15 minutes in a guided relaxation, meditation, or contemplation practice. Lastly, we end with a few minutes for discussion and personal connection. I encourage people to make the session work for themselves, so if you prefer to call in or keep your camera off, that is just fine. You can get more details and sign up to get the Zoom link and call-in information at drkateking.com/unwind. Hope to see you there. Hello, everybody. In this episode, we thought we would do something a little bit different. We thought instead of interviewing a third party, we would interview each other and talk a little bit about our own journeys as meditators over the years, in hopes that it might help some of you out there learning to meditate and on your own meditative journey. So our first thing that we thought we would explore together is how we first got into meditation. So Alex, do you want to tell me, how did you first get into meditation?
The way I got into meditation was I developed a chronic pain condition. And then from that, I discovered Jon Kabat-Zinn, went to a workshop led by him, really loved it, and asked him afterwards how I could have more of that. And he said, meditate. Or I think he said, come to this place, which was the Cambridge Insight Meditation Center. So that was my way in. Mm-hmm. How about you?
My journey into meditation, I think, started with an interest in Buddhism, actually. I think it started more kind of exploring different spiritual paths and being interested in Buddhism and reading about Buddhism and discovering, this was in high school, oh, meditation is something Buddhists do. Let me try that out. And reading some books on the topic, and the books would inevitably have little sections in them, maybe an appendix with some meditation instructions. So trying to read the books and do my best to do what the instructions in the book said. And then eventually finding my way to actual real live places to meditate. That involved, I think the first place I ever meditated outside of attempting to do so in my high school bedroom was at some kind of new age sort of local center it was kind of some kind of a guided Hindu sort of yoga visualization practice thing, and I just had no idea what was going on. But I was intrigued, and then started getting more into it in college, and I spent a semester abroad in Nepal with Naropa Institute in college, and that was really when I developed a daily meditation practice for the first time. We did meditation every morning during that study abroad semester.
Nice.
Then I came back and consequently stopped meditating daily for a very long time. But that did sort of give me a taste of some of the benefit that meditation has to offer. Yeah, I sort of lost my way for some years and practiced very sporadically. And then it wasn't until somewhere in my mid to late 20s in graduate school when I connected to Shambhala Center and started attending programs there that I really started to double down and get into practicing and eventually practicing more regularly. It was kind of a long journey from the first introduction, to any kind of stability in terms of regular practice.
Yes, that's true. Mine too. I mean, come to think of it, I also remember reading Alan Watts' books in high school, but that was more about Buddhism rather than about practicing it. And I was always sort of puzzled and intrigued by everything I read. And I do remember going to a transcendental meditation group for a while in college, now that we've come to think about it.
Now that we're expanding further into the depths of our memories and our histories.
Yeah. And also I remember reading Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha.
Oh, yeah, I
Yeah.
read that as well in high school. That also intrigued me. In fact, that might have been one of the earlier things that inspired me to then find other books on the topic of Buddhism. So, yeah, I mean, I think these days a lot of people find their way to meditation or mindfulness because their therapist tells them it's a good idea, or their doctor tells them it'll help with their blood pressure, or, it's been put out in the world as this kind of panacea for all that ails you. So a lot of people are kind of directed straight to meditation or mindfulness practice. But it sounds like, I mean, for me and maybe for you as well, that the road in wasn't completely that way. For me, it was more through an interest in spirituality and Buddhism. And well, for you, it was connected to pain, but as you're looking back, it also connects to those interests too.
Psychology.
Yeah.
Yeah, nowadays, children's programs have mindfulness sections.
Right, right. And I think about how hard I had to work to find access to these teachings, and now these kids are getting it brought to them in kindergarten. I'm hoping that will make the world a better place in the long run.
Yes, I hope so. So, and what sort of challenges did you face when you first started meditating?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. So, I mean, I think it took me some time to even figure out like what it was or what the point even was, to sort of, I guess I sort of fell into that trap of like sitting and trying to bliss out, or sitting and trying to like muscle my way to enlightenment, because I had been reading about Buddhism and things like that. So that was the frame of reference that I had, was like, somehow if I just sit and meditate here, somehow I'm gonna, become a Buddha. So I don't think I had a really clear sense about what that meant, aside from like trying not to think, some of the stuff that now I just feel like, oh, that's such bad advice. But trying not to think, trying to kind of force myself into some kind of spiritual state, I think, if I'm being totally frank, was probably some of the early, we're talking like high school, early college kind of attempts at meditating were kind of really connected to trying to achieve some kind of altered state in some way, some kind of blissed out meditative calm. And that, not surprisingly, I guess that didn't really do much or work, and wasn't particularly rewarding or pleasant. And that might have been why it was hard for me to establish a regular practice for some time, because I didn't really have a better understanding of what else it could be, or how else to approach it. So that was a challenge with the actual practice, I think, was figuring out how to relate to it in a way that was functional and practical. Not like bringing all this baggage and expectation to it. I think that was some of the early obstacles. Yeah. And then also it was challenging to establish a regular practice, but I think those are connected. How about for you? What have been your challenges?
Well, it's interesting. Now I also remember that in high school, I remember taking out a book from the library about yoga and starting to practice it on my own, and really finding that sense of peace from just breathing and being in my body. So I remember being struck by that. But that's for the previous. That's an answer to the previous question.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me too, I started, finding like old books from the 70s about yoga in my high school library, and, book sales and yard sales, and being like, this esoteric stuff seems interesting. So yeah, yoga was part of my journey too early on.
And it's surprising how effective it was, especially considering there was little instruction, just like, get into this asana and then breathe and feel your body. It's just like, check. I mean, the same level of comfort with meditation, it took me a very long time to achieve, because I think I was caught up on, am I doing it right? And especially the breathing. I remember having such difficulty, like, am I breathing correctly? Am I doing it deep enough, not deep enough? So I think I got really confused by the instructions and trying to follow them correctly. Also about the postural instructions, put your hands here, tilt your head down a little bit. Like, that didn't work for me at all. That really, it turned into trying to stand in the right posture. Like, it's more like a soldier or something, rather than the internal. Yeah. And that was one difficulty. Breathing difficulties, I think, am I breathing it right? Also, conflicting instructions from different sources. Is it follow whatever is most prominent, or follow your breath, or which
Eyes
one is it?
open or eyes
Is it
closed?
yeah, is it your feet? Is it your So why are there so many different kinds?
Yeah.
The other thing I remember made it really difficult for me was I remember vividly joke meditation instructors made about the monkey mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I may be in the minority, I hope I am, but I sort of interpreted that as monkey mind being something laughable and worthy of mocking. So for me, that went into self-rejection rather than, oh, poor sweetie, come here.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was, instead of being able to show kindness to myself for a wandering mind, the message I got was, you guys are laughable if your mind isn't staying in one place, which
that's not helpful.
Not helpful at all. That's I take responsibility for my part.
Meaning how you interpreted the.
Oh, I interpreted it. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Nevertheless, it may be useful for meditation instructors
for
to realize that some people
yeah.
can take it that way.
Right. Yeah. I would try to give the benefit of the doubt to a teacher and hope that nobody was trying to be mocking. But it's certainly possible. I mean, who knows? I wasn't there. But yeah, that, we're so vulnerable, I think, when we're sitting there trying to learn to relate to ourselves, and any little cue we get from the teacher, something that they might think is funny, might really cut to the quick for us. And I don't know, maybe there's cultural misunderstanding too there in terms of humor, what's considered funny. I know in my cultural background that sometimes making jokes is a way of saying like, hey, we're all in it together. Aren't we all kind of a mess? Like that compassion, like that compassionate mess idea from SelfCompassion. So that's the way it might show up for me if I were to make a joke like that. But obviously for somebody else from a different background with different sensitivities, ouch.
That was an ouch.
Ouch. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I was, as you were sharing your challenges, I was thinking of more. Right. Yeah, right. The breathing thing for sure. Yeah, I think I was tended to be too tight in trying to follow my breath too closely and getting kind of tangled up in it and getting out of breath or lightheaded even sometimes, like trying to control my breath, in a way that then ended up being not so helpful and an obstacle to practicing. And the posture stuff too. Yeah. I mean, actually, once I started practicing with more consistency, once I got over that, then there were a new set of obstacles. So the obstacles of the actual technique, so trying to breathe, but being too tight with trying to control my breath, trying to find a comfortable posture, and having my body being really not used to being in the posture of meditation or any kind of meditative posture, so now I feel like my body knows the meditation posture because I do it every day. So like my core is a little stronger, my muscles know what's supposed to engage. My hips are a little bit more open maybe. But when I wasn't meditating a lot and then I would go do a weekend program and sit on a cushion all weekend, my body was very much not used to holding itself up, sitting on a cushion, so I would get more back pain. I would get pins and needles around my shoulder blades, my neck would hurt. And it's funny because that has all gone away now. That is, I no longer have any of that, unless unless I'm doing like a week, then my body is like, I'm not used to this, But initially my body was used to sitting in office chairs, and sitting on couches. And so sitting on a cushion on the floor and holding itself up was not so comfortable. So, I mean, I was able to work with it. I would alternate with a chair, and often by the end of a weekend workshop, spend most of the last afternoon in a chair, and that would help a bit. But that was difficult to know how to work with that and feeling like, am I just like signing up for a life of pain, if I keep meditating? Because I didn't have any hope or trust that would change. And people didn't really talk about it aside from like, oh, if you have pain, like try to sit with it or accommodate it if you need to. But there wasn't really great guidance in that or any sense of, it gets better, so I guess if there's anyone listening who's, a new meditator and you're feeling like some aches and pains when you're sitting, do what you need to do to take care of yourself, but also it does get better. The more consistently you practice, the more your body gets used to being in that position.
That's so different from, I remember signing up for, I think, is it a 7 or 10-day Vipassana retreat? And I think the instructions were like, no scratching, no moving, no speaking, no writing. So, I mean, the other thing is the confusion around like, okay, so this path leads to the end of suffering, check.
And yet I'm suffering so much.
But how is that going to come about? Does it come about because you don't move for long periods? I mean, why? How is this going to happen?
Right.
It's complete mystification about what are the goals. Is it attention practice? Is it endurance?
Right. A suffer fest.
Like purgatory? What is it?
Right. How exactly does liberation occur from this? Right. Yeah, making that bridge from practicing to what seems to be sort of promised, and figuring out how to have a goal without being too goal-oriented, or too aggressive with your practice, but needing some inspiration to keep coming back to the cushion or the chair.
Yeah. And then there's the implicit, perhaps explicit, promise that this will end your suffering. At least that's the way I understood it. So trying to piece it together, like, so why would it end? How is that going to do it? Is it, so if I'm not angry, and of course there are, within Buddhist teachings, there are conflicting, like, what's our attitude toward anger? Is anger an afflictive emotion that whenever it arises, ignore it? Or is it something that you learn from, derive energy from? So and am I going to be free of suffering because I ignore my anger and pain? Yeah.
Right. Or can I liberate it in some way? Liberate the anger or, right. Yeah. More of I think it's tricky because, I mean, this is, I think, part of the challenge of these teachings coming to the West in a pretty haphazard kind of way, is that, as seekers in the West, we encounter a lot of really varied teachings from very different traditions. And you can just show up to some weekend workshop and like spend a weekend on some like really esoteric, kind of teachings about liberating anger into the fire of enlightenment or whatever. And then the next weekend you could go to another workshop that says like, no, very clearly, like anger, jealousy, whatever, these are afflictive emotions and we need to, overcome them. And so it's very confusing without a frame of reference to fit those all into, because they're so different. Because there's, just different levels of teachings and different approaches to working with the same energies. So I know it was helpful for me. For me, I got on the Shambhala path, and having a single sort of traditions, even though within that tradition things also, like, it changes over time as you go deeper into the teachings, how to relate with different aspects of your experience. But it was nice to be part of something that was a bit of a coherent extended training, as opposed to the cafeteria style random weekend workshops that I felt like I was going in circles instead of, and not spiraling anywhere, but just kind of spinning my wheels. So getting on something that was a deepening path really felt like, and there's many ways to do that, but for me it was through Shambhala, and that was very helpful.
I also appreciate that about Shambhala, and that's why I signed up for the levels, and
right, yeah,
because there's a curriculum that progresses, as opposed to here's some medicine Buddha practice, and then
right, just like random show up for a weekend, get some empowerment, and then oh, now what? yeah.
I did spend quite a bit of time in insight meditation, which I really enjoyed. And also in various Tibetan teachings, which I also they're all really enriching, I found.
Yeah. But yeah, it can be challenging when we're first starting out to be getting conflicting practices, I think, is how we ended up on this thread. Right? You show up at one place and they tell you to meditate with your eyes closed, and that anger is an afflictive emotion, and you show up somewhere else and they say meditate with your eyes open, and it's okay to move, and anger is an energy to work with, on the way to realization. It's like, oh, okay. Completely different view here. Yeah. Anything else we found challenging or we wish we knew about when we first started? There's so much I wish I knew when I first started, but I guess that's just part of being on any journey. Yeah. I think for me, two things that I wish I knew or that felt really important parts of my path that I wish I could sort of plant the seed. And I think this is happening more now. One is embodiment and the other is compassion. I think when I was first learning meditation practices, it was very much just like kind of cold and disembodied and just, sit there and watch your thinking or like watch your mind or watch your breath, and it was very kind of had a cutting quality to it in some way, and learning to be more embodied in my practice, to feel my body breathing rather than like watch my breath as if I were outside my body, watching from the outside. That was a really important shift for me. And then being more sort of compassionate with my inner experience and creating a kind of warm and caring environment inside myself when practicing.
And for me, both of those things arrived with when I learned mindful self-compassion. As you were saying, like observing, like as opposed to feeling. That's such a huge difference between feeling your body breathing as opposed to just watching what thoughts are arising. And the self-compassion piece, the warming it up and having compassion towards oneself and towards one's experience. That, to me, that was the missing ingredient, a big missing ingredient that really changed the whole thing around. So it's a much more embodied, warm, loving practice as opposed to more conceptual.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that, as I may have said on a prior episode, so I apologize if I'm repeating myself, but the compassion piece is, I feel like, something that for me, and you and I have talked a little bit about this, for me, when I first started meditating, I think I started to become more compassionate and patient with my experience just from the sitting. So you sit down, you observe your breath or your thoughts or whatever, and then inevitably, your mind goes crazy or whatever. It gets to get distracted, quote, you get caught up in thinking or feeling about something, the narrative of what you have to do for work that day or whatever. And then that coming back like, oh, hey, like, oops, I am away. I have left the cushion in my mind, and then coming back. In order to keep doing that, for me, I learned to be patient and good humored about it, like just how I said it, like, oh, hey, like, where am I? Come on back, And so I was able to apply some self-compassion that was maybe already native, that I already had coming to the cushion. But then it also helped me generate and develop being more compassionate and patient with myself. Whereas I know for others, and you and I have spoken about this, that difficulty with being compassionate when the mind goes off and does its monkey mind thing is an obstacle. Because you're like, oh, I blew it again. Oh, I messed up again. I failed again, and,
Exactly.
and so that'll stop anyone from even being able to persist at a very beginning level.
I experienced that totally.
Yeah. Because
it's just you're just becoming more, if I am becoming more aware of how I'm screwing it up, that's a good reason to stop being aware of it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that there's a sort of self-selected group, of meditators who were kind of able to, or had the sort of lucky capacity to be a little bit more patient or compassionate with themselves earlier on, who were able to even persist in the practice. Whereas now I think there's a lot more focus on being more compassionate during that process. I think that that's starting to become more typical in beginners' instructions, or at least I hope it is.
That's really wonderful.
Yeah.
Another thing that really helped, I think, was reading interpretations of mindfulness-based approaches like ACT, MBCT, MSC. So seeing how psychologists conceived of these practices. What are the things that are effective? What makes them? What leads to happiness or effectiveness? So demystifying it to some extent, like some lifetimes from now I'll be enlightened if I keep doing this. Is it? Versus, self as context. Check.
Right.
I
Yeah.
get you.
So bringing in the kind of modern Western psychological science or cognitive science around what's happening in the brain when we meditate, what states, what practices cultivate what states in our mind or activity in which areas of the brain, and, the sort of ways in which mindfulness has been built into, or practices or interventions have been built from mindfulness type techniques.
That's right.
Yeah.
But just as we say that, I also realize throughout this journey, I have noticed, I've come across teachers who I really could tell were warm-hearted, kind human beings who cared about me. Mm-hmm. Not only Buddhist teachers from a lot of different traditions. Mm-hmm. Hindu priests, Catholic priests, as well as a lot of Buddhist teachers. And I think that must have made a big difference, because they're sort of like feeling touched and accepted by a person and seeing how this warmth emanates from them. Like, there's really something here. Like, well, I haven't met the Dalai Lama, but I've attended teachings and I can see his energy and see what kind of mind he has. Mm-hmm. And that's like, there's really something here, and I can feel it.
Yeah, I've definitely had that experience of feeling sort of impressed by the genuineness and warmth of teachers I've encountered at different workshops, and people who seem sort of ordinary otherwise, like, this teacher is a software engineer who teaches meditation on the weekends, or this teacher is, maybe a psychologist or a social worker, and they're a meditator and they teach these programs. But feeling like, wow, these people have attained something, like there's a genuineness or a good humor, like an ease about them that felt like, I'd like to age like that. I see something there that I would like to embody when I, get to wherever they are on their path. Yeah, I want some of that kind of a feeling on my part, that, yeah. And that, having that as motivation, if we're talking about motivation to practice, which I don't know if we are, but if we are, seeing other people who are practitioners of meditation and seeing the ways in which they manifest more mindfulness, more compassion, more genuineness, whatever in the world. Not to say that any of these people are fully realized enlightened masters or perfect in every way or aren't capable of harm, but nonetheless, seeing that there's been some level of realization there that can really motivate practice. I know it has for me.
You can see the fruits of their labor, as opposed to, you realize it's not just an act, or it looks authentic. Mm-hmm. And I've come across that in MSC as well, mindful self-compassion.
Yeah.
I mean, I found this having a structure and meditating with other people has always been useful for me. Mm-hmm. When there's a set appointed time, other people showing up.
The community.
That works for me.
The community is important. Yeah, I think it was partially that helped me get more established in a daily practice, as well as, when I really started to become part of a community of other people, where it was just sort of expected that, we're all kind of doing this and we're talking about it, and this is something that matters. It's a journey we're all on, and we're all sort of working towards becoming more diligent and regular in our practice. And it makes a difference when you have people in your life, and not just with meditation, but any goal really, when you have other people who are doing what you want to do. I forget, there's some quote about this. If you want to achieve something or start something, surround yourself by people doing it, or who also are aspiring in the same direction. If nobody cares whether you meditate, you might find you never do, or if you're the only one who cares. But when you start to have a community or teachers or people who are like, hey, how's your practice going? You want to have something to say, and just being part of a group where that's part of the expected sort of activities that we discuss makes a difference.
Yes, like that accountability and this awareness and connection. Yeah. And I guess maybe common humanity, seeing other people do it, wanting it for other people even.
Right. Yeah, that's true too. It brings up that sort of well wishes for others path too.
And also, I think another thing that helps is, I think, to be, as a more advanced student, seeing a newer student and wanting them to progress, or offering them help, somehow has a positive effect on, it motivates me in turn. So being able to see things in the round gives a better perspective than,
Yeah, maybe like being a teacher and wanting to really understand what you're teaching or something, or being a mentor and wanting to have done something or mastered something so that you can share that knowledge with those who are coming after you.
But also, I think the act of teaching or helping, even in small ways, I think cues me to formulate and understand things in a clearer way than sort of this sort of woolly way of like, it seems to work. It's like, why does it work? What's compelling about this? This is the answer, and something like that.
So a little more precision in how you.
It brings about clarity
your
and
own
precision
understanding
for me when I'm in, even if it's a single question. I'm always delighted when people ask questions. It's like, what is the answer to that? Great question, because I can make me clarify my own thinking.
Yeah,
it's like crystal.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, even some of these sort of questions we're fooling around with, like, what are your challenges, or how did you get into this, or how do I articulate that in a way that might be helpful for other people, or distill that down in some way that.
What benefits of practice do you experience these days, or in general?
Yeah, this is such a great question, seeing as how we came up with it ourselves. I say that because in spite of really knowing it helps, it continues to be difficult for me to completely articulate. So going back to what we were just saying about, a good question, or wanting to understand something so we can share it with others, it continues to be hard for me to articulate the specific benefits of meditation and teasing that out from my overall life journey, or let's say deepening instruction I've had in Buddhism or something like that. How do I tease out what's coming from the meditation practice versus just what I'm learning or studying and then sort of realizing in my life? I do find it challenging. And I also know that for the most part, most single days when I meditate and I stop. So my daily practice is like 20 to 30 minutes of seated practice. That's what it has been recently over the course of this pandemic. It's been thankfully very consistent, but also just very sort of basic sitting shamatha vipassana kind of practice. When I get up off the cushion, I don't necessarily ever feel like, oh, thank God I did that. I don't get up feeling blissed out. I don't get up on a single day feeling like, wow, that practice was transformational. But I do know on the days in the past, I've been lucky, I haven't missed a day for a while now. And when I've missed a day, or when I've missed more than a few days in a row, then something feels more groundless, or something feels less stable in my mind. I feel a little more overwhelmed, or I feel less spacious in my mind. So I don't notice a big shift on a single day, but when I miss days, I realize what it's doing for me by its absence.
Right.
Yeah. Now, sometimes I'll do a guided practice, and it will be some kind of very specific, generosity practice, and I'll really feel, oh, wow, that helped me cultivate generosity. That's what it did, or like the 4 reminders about this precious human life and impermanence. And when I do a guided practice like that, or I use those contemplations, I really feel like, wow, like life is precious. Very clear, instant sort of shift. But if I'm talking about the very basic kind of sitting and observing my mind kind of practice, or, sitting and being with the breath, that's a little bit harder to pin down on a single day. It's more the buildup of many days and months and years of practice that I feel something has shifted.
Well, the accumulation.
Yeah. I understand myself better. I think my fuse is longer. I think I'm much less reactive in day-to-day life emotionally. There's more space between something happening and me sort of responding to it. Because there's more like, oh, look what's happening here. It's almost like in slow motion. If somebody says something to me that's really off the wall or like surprising or something or painful, there's much more space between receiving it and then deciding how to respond.
Yeah.
As opposed to just like straight from the animal brain, blah,
React.
And I teach. So there's a lot of comments people make in class that I'm just like, where, like what, or I don't know what to do with it, and I'm able to be more improvisational, I think, because of the mindfulness and the meditation, like, okay, let's see what comes of that. A little bit more curiosity and openness. I think that I would attribute that to my meditation practice. How about you?
It's interesting. Definitely more awareness, even though I still have a long way to go. Much more aware, and also more insights into the human psyche, starting with my own, but also understanding other people. Okay, so that's how they might be feeling. Like, that makes sense. It doesn't seem so horrible. I do that too.
That's a great point. Yeah. I mean, as you're saying this, I'm thinking, I think probably it's also hard to know because there's not like a parallel universe me that never meditated to know exactly what the meditation has helped. But yeah, I think you're right. Having more understanding of what's going on in other people's minds because of the time spent sitting with my own.
Yeah, like seeing like things that I used to consider objectionable seem less objectionable because then I'm doing it too. and that's probably what they're thinking or they're feeling. We're not a lot more self-kindness. I think that has come about because of mindful self-compassion practice. But I think it's interesting. I took Kristen Neff's mindful self-compassion quiz recently, and I still scored poorly, but
but you're compassionate about it.
I am, and I think conceptually, certainly, and emotionally, the way I think and feel about things and myself and others is definitely much kinder.
Yeah. I think so too. Yeah. If I look back, I have to sort of look back to like my high school and college self, my early 20s self. And I think I was more neurotic. I think everybody maybe is at that age, but, and more kind of maybe perfectionistic or driven in a sort of pedal to the metal kind of overdrive sort of way. I remember I used to get tension headaches and some sort of somatic symptoms that suggested I was in fight or flight a lot. And that's settled. I don't know if it's the meditation, but I wouldn't be surprised if the meditation wasn't a big part of it, that I don't feel that. I have not lost my, desire to make a difference in the world, and my, I don't think ambition is a dirty word. That's something that I think, especially for women, is important to underline. But to do it in a way that feels more self-compassionate and sustainable, I feel like I've gotten to a better place with that.
That's wonderful. That's a big step.
Thank you, meditation.
I mean, I can also sense like some of the things I discovered in the last year or so. I didn't realize a deeper level of relaxation was really possible and letting go. And that was a revelation for me. And I think I am moving towards self-acceptance. Like at least there's the intention. At least the intention has become genuine for self-acceptance, which is a forward step for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think just spending all that time being with ourselves creates a kind of, I don't know, like, well, this is who I am. This is what my mind does. I don't know, a sort of just a honest acceptance of the reality of where our struggles are, what our challenges are, as well as what our strengths are and limitations might be. Just the getting just a sense of this is the reality of who I am instead of like some fantasy of who I hope to be. Or, yeah, again, I think there's just that the more time you spend with your own mind, the more you're just like, yep, well, that's me. This is me. Yeah.
I'm coming to like myself and having more perspective in terms of,
Yes.
you know.
Well, we hope that this has been a useful and interesting conversation for you, especially those out there who are kind of somewhere in the early stages of your own meditation journey. I think that Alex and I are, I'll speak for Alex and say, we both are true believers when it comes to the benefit of meditation practice and of a whole range of types, you know, whether there's contemplation, whether there's, you know, sort of shamatha practice, you know, sort of cultivating stability, whether it's self-compassion practice. There's so many different types of practices out there in the world now. And hope that this has given you a little bit of a window into our own journeys, and maybe you've heard a little bit of your own journey and some of what we've shared, and maybe some of what we've shared has saved you a little bit of the struggle along the way. So thanks for listening, and we'll be back with another interview in our next episode. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening today.
If you enjoyed this episode, we hope you'll hit subscribe, leave us a great rating or review, and spread the word. You can also go to noblemindpodcast.com to join our email list. You'll get a weekly behind-the-scenes message, news, announcements, and other special goodies we come up with just for you. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.